I have been driven for most of my professional life by the same mission, really, and the same set of interests and values, and they've been evident throughout the whole morning. I think as we talk about how to reimagine learning for the 21st century, part of what we need to do is not reimagine learning, but remember it. Because we know how to do this. Education and effective learning and education is not some puzzle that's just been thrust upon us. And, like some new disease that we haven't encountered before and we're desperately trying to crack the genetic code. There are brilliant schools everywhere. There are fantastic teachers everywhere. Wonderful school leaders everywhere. And there always have been. It's not that the situation is unfixable. We know how to fix it. The problem is that I think politically, most of our countries suffer from a form of cultural amnesia about what it is that helps people flourish. Every human issue presents itself locally, and you have to deal with them locally. But the issues we're talking about today are not unique to Los Angeles or California. They are genuinely global issues, and people all over the world are discussing them and trying to figure it out. And some people are more ahead than others in figuring them out and implementing the solutions. But I think this is a genuinely existential set of issues that we're discussing. How we educate our children, how we educate them to understand themselves, how we give them a sense of promise and hope and fulfillment in their communities is based, I think, on the same principles as the bigger challenges we face outside the school system in the natural environment, our relationship with the earth, our relationship as communities, our relationships politically. And they're being frustrated by the same ideological obstacles. I'm advising on this global campaign on the importance of play, children's play. We did a survey of 12,000 families in different parts of the world and discovered something really rather shocking, I think. Can I ask you, how much time did you spend as kids playing, just outside playing, in the street? A lot. Hours, probably. I mean, I did. I'm one of 7 kids. I grew up in Liverpool, and when we came home from school, we went outdoors and played. We played outside all weekend. This is in the middle of one of the toughest seaports in the world, but we just played outside. And we came back if there was food. We were like cats. Our parents understood this. We were feline, essentially, and if there was food outside, we would come home. And if there wasn't, we'd go to any house that had food and stay there. We just got pushed out the door and played. Up until recently, that's what kids did. They played. I don't mean computer games. I don't mean Little League. I don't mean you standing on the sidelines holding their clothes while you're shouting instructions at them. I mean just playing and being kids. What we've come to call real play. Free, unstructured, physical, active play where kids get messed up, scuff their knees, fall out, have rows, come back exhilarated and desperate to go to sleep. That type of play that we're all designed to engage in. So we asked parents, 12,000 parents in different parts of the world, 12,000 families, how much time do your children spend outdoors, typically playing? The majority of kids these days spend much less than an hour a day unsupervised outdoors. About 10% of kids never go outdoors without an adult at their side. And the vast majority don't play at all outdoors, as most of us did for most of human history. So about an hour, let's be generous, about an hour a day. But it's often much less. The international protocols for the treatment of maximum security prisoners require that they spend 2 hours a day outside. So our kids are spending less time outside than high-security prisoners. They're incarcerated in their own homes. Several reasons for it. One of them is parental fear. People are terrified if their kids go outside, awful things will happen. Statistically, they're no more at risk than children ever were. In fact, there's a good case to be made that they are, in some ways, less at risk than previous generations have been because there's so much fuss if anything does happen. But it depends, of course, on your neighborhood. We're hearing this morning some of the toughest neighborhoods in Los Angeles are not battlefields constantly. There are good places to play and always have been. There's that. There's the proliferation of digital games. I mean, when I was growing up, there's no good reason to be in the house, frankly. There's nothing there, you know. It changed when we got some furniture, but until then, obviously that made a difference when we could sit down. But generally speaking, there was no good reason to be in the house, and every good reason to get out of it. But now, you know, kids can plug themselves into devices and get lost. So there's a whole range of digital distractions. But that's not real play. And I'm not decrying it, by the way. I'm not being some kind of anti-progressive and saying digital games are bad. They're not. They're fantastic. They're very engaging. But they're not what we think of as real, active, physical, heart-pounding, running around, jumping play, which is what young children are not only designed to do, it's what they have to do if they are to grow properly, socially, emotionally, and physically. And another big pressure is school. There's terrible pressure of homework and testing and competition that is turning this generation into probably the most anxious and nerve-wracked generation in history. I want to talk a bit more about this in just a minute, but the price we're paying for all this competition in schools is an epidemic of tension and anxiety among parents and students. Like, you know it. I don't know any teacher who likes it either. It's one of those systems like, well, who's actually running this? Turns out nobody is, which is good news because it means we can change it. But, for example, South Korea is largely vaunted as the most successful system in the world in terms of testing on the PISA test, along with Shanghai and Singapore and parts of Hong Kong. South Korea and some of these other high-performing countries also have the highest rate of teen suicide anywhere in the world. So we pay a high price for this nonsense. And there was a report I saw the other day, I think it was on CBS. Might not have been, though. It could have been NBC. I'm just saying. But it happened anyway. It was a report on an experiment in Texas where a group of schools had started to allow more time every day for recess, elementary schools. So these kids are outside 3 times a day for 20 minutes running around and playing. And they were reporting. There was a reporter in the playground, you know, like they were out on some battlefront. You know, this just in, you know. I'm here, embedded in the playground in Texas. You know, as if something remarkable was taking place, and said, all around me there are children playing. Staggering, really. And they reported that the result of all this was the kids were more interested at school, they were more engaged at school, and then there was a panel in the studio where experts were debating whether this was a good thing, what's the research show, is it improving test scores? And I think you have lost your mind. We have lost our minds, haven't we? If we have just rediscovered childhood in Texas as some odd phenomenon where children run around and play and they feel better if they do, and we need a panel of experts to explain to us, to try and fathom what might be going on here. We should all give up and go home, I think, at this point, because, you know, it's like, you know, we have agricultural systems of, industrial systems of agriculture, which are devastating the planet. This thin little layer of soil that surrounds the planet, on which all life of our sort depends, has taken billions of years to accumulate, and we're washing it away in a chemical mix in less than a couple of generations. It's been estimated, by the way, that in Europe, if we don't reverse this trend, we may have, optimistically, about 100 more harvests. Well, this is plain insanity, isn't it? We know there are conditions under which people flourish and conditions under which they don't. There are conditions under which all living things do well and conditions under which they don't. And the reason that so many kids don't do well in schools is not because of the kids, it's because of how we do school. And if we did school differently, the kids would do well. and do better, because kids want to do well. And it's kind of that straightforward. And a lot of the work I've been doing has been around this idea, like, what are those conditions under which people do well? And it turns out we've always known what they are, we've just forgotten them. Or rather, there's been a kind of political culture for the past 25, 30 years, which is required schools to act against their better instincts. And I think this is why it's so important, as Pedro said this morning, that we shouldn't be talking about reform, we should be talking about transformation. There's no point trying to fix this. We just need to change it and do something differently. Years ago, I was born in Liverpool. Did I say that? Well, I was. So, I defy you to contradict me on that. I was, because I was there, that's the point. So, when I was in my early 20s, I went round an abattoir in Liverpool, a slaughterhouse. A slaughterhouse, an abattoir, I can't remember now why I went, honestly. It's a long time ago. I think I was on a date. I know how to please a woman, frankly. I mean, before we go to the restaurant, let's go and see where this all came from. So you don't overorder. So I was going around this abattoir with a group of us. It's like a popular thing, and with our tour guide. An abattoir is a factory that is designed specifically to kill animals. And they do. They are tremendously successful. Honestly, they're kind of infallible, to be honest. Very few escape and form survivors clubs and have annual reunions. That was close, absolutely. No, it works. And when I was going around this thing, at the far end of it, it's a bit of a grisly experience to have, but you should have it, by the way. If you've never been to an abattoir, you should go around. It will change your mind about a lot of things. It's like my wife's mother, she was from Ireland, she was, and she always used to say, she wasn't being morbid, but she said, you should, at least once a month, you should go to a funeral. She wasn't being morbid. It was just to remind you that this isn't forever. I think it's very important that we need a sense of perspective about how much time we have and what we do with it. I'll come back to this in just a minute. But anyway, my point is this. If you design a system to do something, specifically, don't be surprised if it does it. And if you design a school system to do something in particular, don't be surprised if that's essentially what it does. Now, our systems are not designed to encourage the things we're all talking about. They were designed to do something else. They were designed to promote, Saving Horace Mann, who did have a wonderful vision for education, but as they've evolved, and particularly as they've evolved in the past 50 years, they've turned into something else. They've turned into systems which celebrate conformity, compliance, and linearity. And we pathologize difference in our school systems. One of the ways we do it is we have a very narrow conception of ability in schools. We think that human intelligence is a synonym for academic ability, and it's simply not. Academic ability is important, but it's not the whole of human intelligence by a very long way. But if you start out with a narrow conception of ability, you automatically generate a large conception of inability, or of disability, of people who need remedial help. It would be, wouldn't it, like running an entire national sports education system that was entirely focused on lacrosse or cricket. Sport takes multiple forms and engages multiple areas of people's intelligence, physicality, and athleticism. But if you reduce it to one and said, look, the really important sport is lacrosse, or pick your own sport, and the people who are good at that are really the people we're looking for. They're the top performers. They're the smart ones. And you get the whole system to do that. And if you find people who aren't good at that, you can say, well, we do have remedial programs in baseball, in the high jump, in athletics. But the real people we're looking for are the lacrosse players. Well, that's what we've done in our school system, effectively. We have produced a narrow conception of the mind, and people who don't show it, don't have a capacity for it, don't have any enjoyment in it, are pathologized by the system. They become the problem. A lot of the work I know that Pedro and the team here is involved in is focusing on the school-to-prison pipeline, which is an outrageous aberration in our education systems. You see, the reason it's like an industrial system is industrial systems are focused on conformity and compliance and on producing certain types of things. And it's a feature of industrial systems, linear systems, that they produce waste products products for which we cannot find a proper purpose or which are marginal to the intention of the system when it was designed. And we're doing that all the time in schools. There are people who don't make it, who don't get through the system, who aren't valued by the system, who are considered to be wasteful byproducts of the system. And they end up in all kinds of other places. Now, it's not, I mean, Pedro, I'm sure, will confirm this. It would be wrong to say if you leave high school early that you end up in jail. That's not true. What is true is a very high proportion of the people in the prison system left high school early and didn't graduate. It's roughly, as you look across the country, it's anything between 15 and 30% of kids don't complete high school. Actually, in some districts, it's more like 50%. Well, you can't at that point, I dislike the word dropout because it implies that kids have failed the system. With numbers like that, you can't tell yourself that anymore. I mean, you have to say the system failed them, don't you? Because kids want to learn, they just don't like the way they're being engaged or the fact they're not being engaged. So my work, and I think this conference is about this, I think it's what we're all been talking about, implicitly and explicitly, is what are these conditions under which people flourish? And can we make them a central part of how we educate everybody? There has been, for the past 20-odd years now, a concerted effort to raise standards in schools. It's global in character. It's been fueled by the league tables published by the OECD in Paris. And my friend Pasi Sahlberg from Finland refers to this as the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM, for short. And it is infectious. All countries are doing it. America has thrown itself wholeheartedly, politically, into trying to improve its rankings in the international league tables in reading, math, and science. Billions of dollars have been spent in America to the commercial for-profit testing companies to come up with more and more tests to raise standards. It hasn't worked. It's greatly enriched the testing companies. It's done nothing to improve standards, graduation rates, engagement levels, or the motivation of teachers. In fact, on the contrary, it's a busted flush, and yet we keep doing it. Billions and billions of dollars every year. It's what we're hearing this morning about California. I came across this image recently. I'd just like to share it with you. Hang on, it's in my pocket. I want to show this image to show you that this presentation has been prepared. I have thought about this while I was streaming Pedro live this morning. Now, that's not an unusual image. You know that's the sort of thing that goes on. What's happened in the reform movement has been based on three big principles. The first of them is competition, in no big order. It's a very, very competitive system, particularly as it's been expressed here in America. Kids against kids, schools against schools, districts against districts, state against state. You know, the Obama administration who did lots of wonderful things, but in education, their signature initiative was called Race to the Top. All the rhetoric is about racing, competition, outperforming the competition. If we know anything about human life, it's what we're hearing from the community representatives this morning. Great communities, great schools, great families, great districts, great countries thrive on collaboration. Now, I'm not saying there's no room for competition, but human life is a collaborative enterprise. It's the only way it works. We are 7.5 billion people on this planet. We are intensely social creatures. Our knowledge is a densely woven, intricate fabric that we compose together. None of us knows more than a fraction of it. The whole system only works if we work together. And yet our education systems don't practice or preach. I mean, your school may, but politically you're not encouraged to practice or preach collaboration. The message of the system is it's about competition. Kids learn more than anything else from each other. Learning is a very social process, and yet in many of our schools, because of this competitive dynamic, children learn in groups but not as groups. It astonishes me that people are going around saying, have you come across this new thing called project-based learning? What? When did that become a new thing? You know, when did participant research become a novelty? These things have been around forever. Montessori, as we're hearing from Chef Alice earlier, based their entire system on collaboration, kids working together, on the social character of learning. But instead, this is the message we get. Sooner or later, you're going to have to sit down and outperform other people, because all this is about getting people into college. Now, we can talk about that a bit later on if you like. I mean, I like colleges. I've worked in colleges. We're in a college. But not everybody has to go to college. There are other ways to have a fulfilling life rather than lining up and doing an academic degree. Plenty of good ways. But one of the results of this is that we have completely marginalized vocational programs in schools. All those things you used to do at school, shop, workshop activities, practical things with your hands, getting out and doing things, it's all gone in favor of this. The balance is completely shot here. But there's another way let me give you another version of this picture. And I'm going to stand it on its head. I don't know how many of you have seen this picture before, but this was taken in the Indian state of Bihar. And it was about 2 years ago. It caused a furor in Bihar. Among politicians, among others, because, let me just explain what's happening here. This building is an examination center, and inside it are 10th graders who are taking a test which has a critical bearing on whether they progress to the next level of their education and what institution they may go to. The people scaling the walls are their parents, who are shoving cheat sheets through the window to help them pass the test. They're doing this because they feel the quality of teaching has been so low in Bihar that these kids don't have a fair crack of the whip. This is the equity argument. So their parents are doing what they can to give their kids an advantage. Of course, it corrupted the whole system. What you can't see are the dozens of people on the floor waiting to climb the wall when there's a space. Now, this is madness, isn't it? This is no way to run the education system of our young, but I show it to you not because it's some odd thing that just happened in Bihar. Although it doesn't look like this in America, we're doing the same thing. Our parents are literally being driven up the wall. And so are schools and teachers trying to keep pace with this increasingly intense mode of competition. And the point is, it doesn't have to be that way. And the other thing about this, of course, it's all to too little end. At the moment, there are 1.2 billion kids in the world, that's kids between the ages of 15 and 24. About 14% of them are unemployed, have never been in work, and feel they have no prospect of a job. It depends where you go. In America, youth unemployment runs at about 10%. It's about twice adult unemployment, typically. When there's a recession, it's the kids that get hit first, typically. In parts of the Mediterranean, the rate of youth unemployment is over 50%. Greece, that's true. Parts of Italy, that's true. So despite all this money being pumped into these systems, the very people it's meant to serve, which are people in business and the economy, are the ones who are being least served, in some respects, by the system. It's a very expensive failure. So the thing is that the system did work at some point, but this is the problem of reform. What's happening is that we're trying more and more to make the old system work, putting more resource into it, trying to make it more efficient. But if the system's designed to do the wrong thing, it doesn't matter how efficient it gets, it'll still do the wrong thing. So my argument is that we have to rethink how it works. So one of the issues is competition. We need collaboration. Another is that education is based on standardization. Human life isn't. Human life is based on the opposite principle of diversity. Can I ask you, how many of you here have got children? Okay. How about 2 children or more? Right. And the rest of you have seen such children? Small people wandering around. Okay. Well, I will make you a bet which I will win. If you've got 2 children or more, I bet you they are completely different from each other, aren't they? You would never confuse them, would you? Like, which one of you remind me? Your father and I are constantly being baffled at breakfast, so I have a simple system of badges. The point is, every human life is different. A few years ago, I was at a peace summit in Vancouver. It was called the Vancouver Peace Summit. They're very good at titles in Canada, that's what we've discovered. So the opening session was called World Peace Through Personal Peace. And I was hosting it. We had an hour to sort that out. We were just killing time for the final 20 minutes, ready. But there were 10 people on the panel, one of whom was the Dalai Lama. He was the guest of honor. So I had to introduce the Dalai Lama. Pedro had to introduce me. I had to introduce the Dalai Lama. You know, but then I thought, I don't really have to introduce him, do I? Because I thought anyone whose name starts with the, you know, you've arrived socially, haven't you, really? You can relax in most settings, really. Sorry, which Dalai Lama are you? That'd be the. So, he was asked all kinds of great things, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man. But he said a couple of things I just want to tell you about. One was, he said, to be born at all is a miracle. So what are you going to do with your life? It's such a simple question, but such an important one. You know, can I ask you, how many human beings do you think have ever lived? So let's cut the difference, say 100 billion. Most people would go with that as a number. About 100 billion people. Now the point is, every one of those lives has been unique, unrepeatable, different, and unto itself. Nobody's had your life before. Nobody's been born with your sensibilities, your particular mix of talents and characteristics and genetic predispositions. Nobody, not your parents, not your twin, nobody. Every life is one-off. And to be here at all, as Adele said, is a miracle. Every child in your class, every kid in the LAUSD school system is one-off, unrepeatable, unto themselves. Diversity is the hallmark of human life, just as it is the rest of life on Earth. The planet thrives on diversity. And our big mistake is to try and impose conformity on top of it, because it automatically pathologizes difference of every sort, of gender, of race, of ethnicity, of faith, you name it. Human life is as intensely diverse as every other form of life on Earth, plants, flora, and fauna. The other thing he said, by the way, he was asked a question, and it took him a very long time to think about it. And then he leant forward, opened his eyes, and he said, and I thought, this is it, and he said, I don't know. And I thought, what do you mean you don't know? You're the Dalai Lama. You know, we don't know. You know, but you have the definite article in your name. So he said, he said, I've never thought about that. What do you think? To the room. Now, the reason I mention that is because it illustrates something important to me anyway. One is that here is one of the world's greatest teachers, the leader of one of the world's oldest, most profound wisdom traditions, perfectly comfortable saying, I don't know. And why doesn't he know? Because nobody can know everything. It was outside of experience. It's not something he'd thought about. He didn't think he could find out on Google. He thought, I don't know. And because nobody can know everything. And it's perfectly fine to say you don't know. It's fine as a teacher to say you don't know to your students, because they may well know something that you don't. And that was the second part of his point. He said, what do you think? And what it simply illustrates is that the world's great teachers are also great students. Learning is a conversation. It's not a monologue saving what's happening right now, but it's a conversation. We learn collectively. So we have systems which are based on standardization rather than on diversity. But our systems are also based on the idea of division rather than on synergy. No, we separate the arts and the sciences. We separate elementary schools from kindergarten. We separate elementary from high schools. We separate teachers from each other. We separate schools in the districts. But synergy is how life works. It's what the whole principle of ecological development is. Ecosystems work by the mutual enrichment of their various parts. But we have schools which are run separately. So one of the effects of compliance is, as Pedro was saying earlier, the arts get pushed out. The sciences get pushed to the front. Now, the sciences are deeply important, but they're not more important than the humanities. They're not more important than literature. They're not more important than physical education. They're important. But because we have this divisive system of thinking about schools politically, the effect is that we push things to one side and marginalize things that matter just as much. And then I get politicians saying to me all the time, you know, we have these problems of disaffection, disengagement, low graduation rate. How do we solve them? And I'm not being facetious to say, stop causing them. Because if you stopped doing that, the problem would go away. And it actually does. That's what happens in alternative schools. It's what happened in the Harlem Children's District. It's what happens when people gather together in the communities. Something was being said this morning. Empower the community, get parents involved, work with them collaboratively, push back on these restraints, change the model, and the problems aren't so much solved, they evaporate. They get replaced by something much richer. And I want to give you a couple of quick examples of that before we're done. But here's the thing. There is a difference between education, between learning, education, and school. And it's an important difference to dwell on. Learning is the natural process of acquiring new skills and understanding. Human beings are intensely curious. We are the most curious species ever to walk the earth, so far as we know. We are also driven by a set of powers which, so far as we can judge, are unique to us in their quality and range. There's one way of describing it, but it's not a single power, it's a multiple set of capabilities. But the way I think of it is the term imagination. Human beings are gifted with profound powers of imagination. And we marginalize it and take it for granted. But if you think of it, imagination is the root of everything distinctively human. Imagination is the ability to bring into mind things that aren't present to our senses. With imagination, you can anticipate the future. You can't predict it always, not with people or living creatures. You can in the physical world, but not so much with people. With imagination, you can visit the past, or you can reappraise the past, you can reframe the past. With imagination, you can step outside the present moment and see the world as other people might. It's the seat of empathy. But this power to bring to mind things that aren't present is deeply potent in human culture, because from it flow a whole set of other capacities that we call creativity. I mean, creativity is really putting your imagination to work. It's materializing your ideas, bringing them into being. And it could be in any form whatever, but creativity is a very practical process that involves using media. There could be numbers, it could be clay, it could be steel, it could be fabric. This whole building began in somebody's imagination and became a collective enterprise of craft, skill, design, applied thought, and the manipulation of materials and space. One of the best examples I can think of collective, collaborative creativity was the moonshot. Do you remember in 1961 when President Kennedy said, by the end of the decade, we're going to put a man on the moon? It was a man. And 1968, it happened. It involved thousands of institutions, hundreds of thousands of people working in dozens of disciplines around the world to make that happen. But it happened through a massive effort of collaboration driven by a single vision. And what interests me about it was, although they were daunted by the objective, they didn't try to negotiate the objective. You know, the objective is what it is. And I think we have a similar challenge in front of us, the transformation of the life chances of our children through the transformation of schools. It will be a massive collaborative effort. It needs a unifying single vision. It needs a common set of principles. It needs people working together in all their disciplines and all their capacities, parents, teachers, whoever they happen to be. But it can be done because we created the system in the first place, and so we can recreate the system if we choose to do that. But this power of imagination and creativity is what is at the heart of human achievement in the arts, in the sciences, in technology, in every field. It's not unique to the arts. It takes particular turns in the arts, but it's in every part of human life. We live in a veil of conceptions that we create together as we work together to frame our understanding of the world. And the drive here, I think, we have to recognize firstly, say that children are born with these powers and they love to learn. Human beings are intensely creative and very curious. Kids don't all like being educated, and many of them have a big problem with school. But the problem is school. It's not the kids. We don't need to fix the kids, we need to fix school. Let me give you an example. I've got 2 kids, and like most kids, by the age of 2-ish, they were learning to speak. Your children probably learnt to speak around the age of 2-ish, thereabouts. Depends. All children do. And the interesting thing about this is that if you're a parent, you didn't teach your child to speak, did you? You didn't because you couldn't. They taught themselves. You didn't because you couldn't, because you don't know how you do it either. It doesn't happen. You don't teach your child to speak. Your child learns to speak because she wants to and she can. And they take it in through their skin, through the culture. They learn it socially. Kids love learning until they go going through school. And then gradually they start to lose interest. And it's not your fault as a teacher necessarily at all. It's the system in which it all operates. What Pedro was talking about earlier, chopping the day up into bits and pieces, ringing bells, dividing things away, making them sit down, all the conditions under which you would not choose to learn yourself and didn't when you were younger either. So my point is this system can, with an effort of will and a concerted and collective vision, can be transformed, and it has to be transformed for our children's sake, for our communities, and for the larger existential challenge that we face collectively. And when I say it can be, I'm going to show you a very quick video just to illustrate it. But when I said a lot of people know me through the TED Talks, it's very nice. But you know, I've spent my whole life in education. I wasn't invented at TED. You know, so I published this book a few years ago because of that. Because people said, "Okay, well that's the problem. What do you do about it?" So this book is an attempt to set out the principles on which the transformation can happen. This isn't something I've invented. I stand, as you all do, in a very long tradition. We have to fight this amnesia problem. There have been people laboring, arguing, figuring out how to do school better since the time we first had schools. Back to the Greeks and beyond that. In all parts of the world, people have had, there is a deep history, and in the last 200 years particularly, there have been concerted efforts in every part of this country to apply the proper principles of holistic education and the conditions under which children will thrive in school districts around the country. There's a massive and honourable repertory of research and practice for you all to draw from. You are not isolated pioneers. You stand in a very long tradition. So I've tried in there to say a bit about it, but the thing at the bottom is the grassroots revolution is important. Somebody said this morning that the change will come from the ground up. All change comes from the ground up. No matter how bad it may seem temporarily with the people at the top, real social change, cultural change happens from the ground up. It's a grassroots movement. I mean, for example, I was born in 1950, and I lived through the 1960s. I was a teenager in the 1960s. I lived through the sexual revolution, as you can see. And I missed it, as it turns out. I didn't go out that weekend, but I read about it later on. It seemed to have been a fantastic time. But at the height of the sexual revolution, people writhing around in the streets uncontrollably. It's exhausting. It doesn't last long, that type of thing, honestly. It fizzles out within an hour or two. But while all that was going on, nobody, you know, when feminism was in its first, well, I should say its second big movement after the suffragettes in the 60s and 70s, nobody was discussing same-sex marriage. It was not on the cards, it wasn't on the table, it wasn't up for debate. It was still a criminal act in many parts of the world. I know it is still in a few. What interests me is that over the past few years, every state in the Union here has passed legislation to approve same-sex marriage. Yeah, like, of course, can we just get on with that and do that? It's been largely uncontroversial. I mean, there have been pockets of controversy, but most people say that's fine. That's such a huge shift. And it happened without anybody specifically being responsible for it. I mean, there have been key people, key campaigns, Harvey Milk, the Rainbow Coalition, has been lots of things. Ellen has been a major influence, I'm sure, in changing the minds of people in Middle America about maybe this is okay. You know, Will and Grace, somebody talked about recently. There have been things in the popular culture, but these weren't designed to do that. These came out of the shift in the popular culture. The reason I'm saying it is, this shift, which most people now accept, which is a big strand of the diversity argument, did not happen because members of Congress went on a retreat in Aspen, where they spent the weekend deciding this was an issue they had to go back and sell to their voters. You know, it was too long coming, and we have to go back and tell people what the right thing is. It happened because the voters told them they wanted it to happen. And you've got to remember, most politicians have a very short shelf life. You know, they're there for 2 or 3 years. I mean, some people last a lot longer than that in their political life, but the shift happens from the ground up, and that's my point. When people say, how do we change the education system, don't wait for anybody to do it. You are the system. We're all the system. We're it. If you're a teacher for the children in your school, you are the education system. When you close the door, if there is a door on your classroom, what you do next is the education system. If you're a head teacher When you stand up in front of all your teachers and kids on a Monday morning, you are the system, and what you do next is the system. And there's a lot more room for innovation in the system than people believe there to be. There are two big constraints on the education system. One is the political culture, which bears down on schools, but the other is the habits of mind, which keep the system in place within the schools. Most of the things that will go on in schools don't have to happen. I mean, when I say there's a difference between learning, education, and school, learning is natural, education is a formal process of learning, an organized system. A school is a community of learners. That's it. It's a community of learners. And how schools are organized is it up to the people who run them. So let me just show you this quick video. This is something that's on Dutch television. This is a puzzle. See if you can solve it. People were invited to go into this room and solve this problem. In the room, there's a table. On the table, there's a plastic tube. And at the bottom of the tube, there's a peanut. They have to get the peanut out of the tube. That's it. See if you do it before they do. Oh, the table is bolted to the floor. The tube is bolted to the table. Who got it? All right. I didn't when I first saw it, but look, I'll tell you, most people don't get that. The ape got it. So there's hope. You know, there is a plan B. That's what I'm saying. But here's the thing. Everything those people needed to solve the problem was in the room. All the resources they needed were right there. The people who solved it saw the resource that was available to them and made use of it. The people who didn't include the resources in their framing of the problem or the solution. I'm sure many people went in, they saw this bottle of water at the back with a little bowl of fruit, because it was at the back with a bowl of fruit, and thought, that's very nice, these people. I don't have time for that right now, I've got to solve this problem. The people who solved it made use of everything that was available to them. The thing is, can you imagine anybody failing to solve the problem if they'd gone in and the water bottle had been right next to the tube? They just wouldn't automatically think, oh, that's easy, straightforward, with a few exceptions. And that's my point as well, that we have all the resources we need to solve the problem. We've got teachers, parents, kids, and cultural organizations and goodwill everywhere. We need to get everybody involved in restoring the culture of our schools. Human resources, yours, your kids, the parents, human resources are just like the Earth's natural resources. They're very diverse. They're often hidden. You have to go digging for them. Children's talents, any more than your talents, don't immediately show themselves unless there's the opportunity. It's why you need a broad curriculum. And when you've discovered them, you have to refine them and do something with them to find out their real value and purpose. And what this leads to for me is to say that the analogy with education and industrialism is not so much with manufacturing. The real analogy is with industrial agriculture. Because industrial agriculture grew up at the same time as industrial manufacturing in the 18th and 19th centuries. The analogy is perfect because they're dealing with living systems. Industrial agriculture revolutionized the way we produced living things, plants, and how we raised animals. Industrial agriculture was based on 3 innovations. The first of them was mechanization, which made it possible to till huge areas of land simultaneously. This is an image to me of industrial agriculture. Now, it's a harsh image, but all across the world, this is what we've been doing with the land. This planet is covered by a very thin smear of soil, and we depend upon it. And I say it's taken billions of years to get to where it is. The Earth, until we got to grips with industrial agriculture, was a scene of massive natural diversity. In the past 300 years, we have come collectively, as a species, there are now 7.5 billion of us on the planet, and we're heading for 9 billion by the end of it. That's almost 10% of all human beings who've ever lived on the Earth right now, the biggest generation by far in the whole of human history. We have come, through these processes, to depend on about 11 plant species to sustain the population of the planet. You know, corn, maize, you can name them, potatoes, rice. But there are literally tens, probably hundreds of thousands of other species that we've discarded, pushed to one side in the mania to depend upon these sorts of crops. Along the way, we have brought ourselves to the brink of what's called the sixth extinction. We've also come to depend not just on 11 forms of plant, but on about 5 species of animal, largely, among the countless thousands of species of animals that were on the planet, living their lives comfortably until we got to grips with all this. We're now, say, on the edge of the 6th great extinction, caused, as far as we can tell, by human activity in the preoccupation with this sort of way of living. In the past 10 years, we have lost something like 75% of the biomass of flying insects around the world, on which we depend for the propagation of plants and our own survival. And no amount of apps on the iPhone will solve that. This is a catastrophe in the natural world that we're fomenting. But it's based on this form of industrial agriculture, which, as you can see, is intensely unnatural. It's based on mechanization, which meant you could grow monocrops as far as the eye could see. The second innovation was chemical fertilizer, because the emphasis in industrial agriculture is on yield and output, more, bigger. And chemical fertilizers force things to grow more quickly. We're doing exactly the same thing with animals, by the way. This is a not unfamiliar feature in how we're dealing with animals currently. We're housing them as if they were inanimate objects. And the third innovation has been chemical pesticides, because natural ecosystems protect themselves. They have their own forms of immunity, and they protect each other. If you separate them out and put them in great open fields and destroy the ecosystem, then they're prey to all kinds of blights and problems, which is Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Now, the thing is, I know it's a complex area, this, but industrial agriculture has been focused on yield, and it's been very successful. But, in terms of yield, but it's destroying ecosystems, it's polluting waterways and rivers and oceans, and it's eroding soils which are being washed away at prodigious rates all around the planet. This is the stuff we depend upon. And the reason is that industrial agriculture has been focused on the plant and on size and yield. Organic agriculture is based on a different principle. Organic agriculture is based on natural processes of growth and development, and organic sustainable farmers, which is what Chef Alice was talking about earlier, know something different. If you want to really increase output in a healthy environment and for it to be sustainable, not short term, not to bankrupt the planet, you don't focus on the plant, you focus on the soil. If you get the soil right, you can grow things in perpetuity. If you follow natural cycles of growth and development and composting, the soil will be rich and it will sustain us, as far as we know, in perpetuity. That's the whole movement towards sustainable and organic agriculture. Well, so this is how people tend to think of the core purpose of organic agriculture. Get the soil right. We depend upon that. And the plant will take care of itself. Create good conditions and things will grow. We've done the same thing, I think, with education. We have been focused for the past 20, 30 years on output and yield, graduation rates, league tables, competition. And along the way, we've neglected the conditions under which people naturally learn and want to learn. And along the way, we've eroded the culture of education, the diversity of that culture, the values under which people flourish best. That culture depends on diversity of learning. We need the arts, we need the sciences, we need physical education, we need people to get up and run around, but they need to play. Their children are growing physically, emotionally, spiritually, as well as cognitively. We have to attend to them holistically. There's an ecosystem of learners and teachers and students and parents and cultural groups. If we get that mix right, it happens every time. If we get the rich culture in the school where it should be, growth and learning happens automatically. Achievement levels go up, they always do. They tend to decline when we forget the culture of the school and make it barren and sterile. I think it's an absolutely existential challenge for us just now. We are 7.5 billion people heading for 9 billion. The Vice-Chancellor said this morning, quoting H.G. Wells, education is a race between civilization and catastrophe. It is. I'm optimistic we can do this, but I think we should never underestimate the importance and power of education in restoring these conditions to our communities and to our children. It's probably never been more important than it is now. And if sometimes you feel marginalized in education, don't forget that you're doing the most important work anybody could do, creating the conditions for the growth and well-being and safety of our children. You know, when you look at a plant grow, it does seem miraculous that something from a small seed will grow into this luxurious being. Education's like that. There have been lots of examples during the day. If you create conditions for growth, people who are otherwise written off flower, flourish, and become themselves. They lead entirely different lives, which are more purposeful for them and more fulfilling for the people they're associated with. But, you know, just like in the natural world, if you say it's a miracle, it sounds like it's a one-off and it's unusual. But in the natural world, miracles are commonplace. And it's true in schools. If you get the conditions right, miracles happen every day. And they do. They're happening here in this city. And our job is to make more of them. We need more miracles and as many as we can. Because if you're in education, you're in the miracle business. And it's the only business, really, I think, that we should be in. Thank you very much.